Hey there guys, I'm back to another video. Today we're diving back into Marvel's Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation 5. With the PC release less than 2 weeks away, it's about time we look back on Insomniac Games' latest project. Now that the game is fully complete with New Game Plus and most of the bug/glitches fixed, is Marvel's Spider-Man 2 still worth checking out? Let's talk about it. So from October 2023 to now, January 2025, a lot has happened with the Burbank studio. For one, the company was victim to a ransomware attack, leaking sensitive data including employee information, an early build of Marvel's Wolverine, and the company's plans through 2032. This obviously affected Insomniac Games negatively as they tried to get past the attack and back on track to Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine. In the leaked documents, fans online saw plans for Spider-Man 2 DLC, which included villains like the Beetle and Carnage. Because fans don't understand we weren't supposed to see this information, this would begin the quote-unquote "Where's Spider-Man 2 DLC" across all their social media platforms. Although the social media guy would continue to shut down hopes of Spider-Man 2 DLC, fans would continue to have these expectations. So when it was announced on October 2024 that the game was coming to PC, the blog post also confirms, quote, "No additional story content planned for Marvel's Spider-Man 2." End quote. I'm probably like the few people who were happy with this decision because Spider-Man Twitter could finally shut up about DLC and stop harassing Insomniac Games. I'm not against DLC, especially if Carnage was involved, but if it doesn't feel right for the studio, then don't do it. We only knew of such plans from maliciously stolen documents, and nothing about DLC was ever formally announced, despite what certain Spider-Man fans might tell themselves. Furthermore, the plans in the document could be old for all we know. This might have been a rough idea where Insomniac Games wanted to go for Spider-Man 2, but plans can change very quickly, especially in the games industry. Just let them cook and they will deliver a product worthy for the players. I haven't replayed Spider-Man 2 since my initial playthrough back in 2023. I did go back in to fetch all the collectibles and complete side quests, but didn't bother doing a full playthrough until the game was either fully finished or added New Game Plus. The New Game Plus experience is about what you would expect. While this feature should have been available at launch, there were some quality of life changes Insomniac Games added, like choosing symbiote ability colors. My favorite part about New Game Plus is being able to swap the suits around, now that I've seen what the game looks like with the default skins. I'm still pretty basic, opting for Peter's cherry red and black advanced suit, and Miles' tracksuit. The biggest problem with this is when symbiote cutscenes happen, like when Peter dons it and removes it. The game doesn't have separate suit filters on. It's a minor thing, but replaying on New Game Plus requires the player to think ahead to swap suits around for certain cutscenes to work. I played on ultimate difficulty since all the powers and abilities transferred over, and wanted to give myself a challenge for the live streaming experience. The open world gameplay is still exhilarating and fun as hell. Zipping around the city with the web wings never gets boring. The boss fights were a lot tougher than I remembered. I was getting my butt tossed around by Kraven and Wraith, but made the New Game Plus playthrough more enjoyable since I can't just breeze through these segments with ease. The biggest problem with the boss fights is how overcrowded they are in the second half of the adventure. After the initial Sandman boss fight, which Insomniac Games are 3 for 3 on phenomenal opening sequences for their Spider-Man games, it's about 7 to 8 hours later until the Lizard boss fight. That's insane, and I understand it's due to the game's narrative taking shape, but nearly 8 hours from the first to second boss fight is a little ridiculous. Furthermore, the boss fights never utilize both Spider-Man at once. If both characters are present, we switch back and forth between them like the Sandman boss fight and the final boss Venom. It would have been crazy tech to have a boss fight where you could swap between Miles and Peter on the fly, but that potential is never fully realized. Combat is more reliant on hand-to-hand action rather than gadgets, as the pool has been diluted to 4. Instead, the game adds more abilities for Miles and Peter. Between Miles' Venom technique and Peter's symbiote power, there's many abilities to unlock for the heroes. I originally said that there should have been more gadgets, but I think the game strikes nice balance between the gadgets and abilities. It's a battle of the give and take within Spider-Man 2's combat. Parrying is essential and continues to work as intended. A lock-on feature, especially during boss fights, was low-key needed. I still believe Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is the best open-world Spider-Man gameplay yet. The fast-paced movement throughout the city, robust combat tools, and plenty of side content to complete that makes this game feel spectacular. Now, let's dive into the narrative for Spider-Man 2. The game introduces Harry Osborn as a main player for the adventure, and he's given the right amount of attention, opening up with a trip down memory lane at Midtown High while splicing in flashback sequences of their youth. The problem starts when he becomes Venom, which I don't mind. I was predicting it leading up to the game's launch because who else was Venom going to be? Once the symbiote is off Harry and latches onto Peter to save his life, Harry starts to feel sick again and his resentment towards Peter happens naturally. I like his descent into becoming Venom because his desire for the symbiote is reasonable alongside his hatred towards Peter/Spider-Man. The problem with this version of Venom is how rushed the game feels from that point onward. Suddenly, New York City is taken over by symbiotes in order to quote-unquote heal the world. And I love that Insomniac Games pulled pages from Donny Cates' Venom run and Web of Shadows, but it doesn't get enough time to breathe. It all happens so fast, and that's where the narrative starts to fall apart. During the AIAS Game Maker's Notebook podcast, Brian Intihar, senior creative director at Insomniac, said,
I can't believe I'm telling the story. I remember when there was one part in the project where we realized that the back half of the game was, we weren't going to make it. Like, we weren't going to hit the quality bar. And, I had it wasn't, I'll say heated, but it wasn't heated like we were arguing. Like, I was like frustrated that we weren't going to get everything done. And I remember it was our Sony producers. It was Mark, Ara, Grady, Joe kind of saying, guys, we're not there every single day, but we see it. And Jeanette has confirmed it. Like, we're not going to get all the way there. And I had I will say, an emotional reaction to that talk. And then I stepped back for like 5 minutes. And I remember as people were talking on the Zoom call, I was just scribbling down how we could basically, if we cut these things, how we connect it all back. I was just made it objective. I'm like, does any of this stuff impact the pillars of the game? No. Can we reconnect these pieces with minimal rework or, because you don't want to make a scope decision that creates more scope, right? Because that can happen times too. And you just did like the napkin sketch of what it could do, and I was like, and then 5 minutes later, I'm like, all right, let's go. After having that emotional reaction, because we care a lot.
So that's likely why Venom's portion of the game is so rushed. From reveal to the end credits, it's only 3 hours, and taking into consideration introducing Venom, having the open world get infected with symbiotes, it's a lot to take in. Also, every encounter the Spider-Man have with Venom until the final moments, no fight occurs, and instead Venom just runs away. The idea of a Web of Shadows setup with the Spider-Man is awesome, but sadly doesn't stick around for too long and wraps up fairly quickly. I was even down with the whole Scream boss fight being a pseudo therapy session for Peter and MJ. My theory as to why the final act of the game feels so rushed is supported by Intihar's story. Sony pushed Insomniac Games to meet the October 20th, 2023 release date. If the team kept to the original plans for Marvel's Spider-Man 2's final act, a delay likely would have happened. But because the PlayStation 5 needed a holiday title, a delay was never going to happen from PlayStation's perspective. Without Spider-Man 2, Sony would have had nothing. My theory continues to be supported by the state in which Spider-Man 2 launched in. I mean, the floating white cube and a ton of other performance hiccups made it clear that this game was rushed to a certain extent. I know cut content is always part of any creative project, but evidence is in the game and in what Intihar said. No New Game Plus and Mission Replay at launch was already telling, especially when 2020's Miles Morales had all those features in the box. While I don't mind Harry Osborn becoming Venom and how that shift happens naturally, it feels very lackluster after the transformation. There's still other components to the narrative that are worth talking about. Kraven is a phenomenal villain here and probably the best mainstream adaptation for the character so far. He's menacing and threatening in nature. He's not dumb and actually plans ahead before striking into action. Kraven killing a couple of the Sinister Six members is dope, but isn't said in required story dialogue. I somehow miss Shocker and Electro's death in my New Game Plus playthrough, which makes it easy for new players to skip these as well. We see Scorpion die obviously, but the impact of killing multiple Spider-Man villains is important to demonstrate Kraven's power. I mean, he does technically kill Peter in their first encounter, so that's a strong first impression already. Kraven being diagnosed with cancer, causing him to go on this last hunt, is fitting for the character. He won't let a disease take him out and would much rather have a formidable opponent do it. Miles' narrative is often criticized for being the same story as his 2020 solo adventure, where he's trying to find himself and become his own Spider-Man. I personally don't see that in Spider-Man 2 because he's more than capable of being an equal to Peter and even surpasses him before the adventure concludes. His story does have a hard time competing with the symbiote storyline, but once he confronts Martin Lee, it's kicked into high gear. Reforming his arch nemesis is such a Miles story where he truly wants to save everyone. Also, Miles not forgiving Martin Lee is another amazing moment while letting go of the hatred he has for Lee. It's a very human story that lands on all fronts and might be the best part of Spider-Man 2's narrative. Miles gets so many MVP moments, I don't know how anyone can say it's a repeat of the previous stories. At the end of the day, I think Insomniac Games did what they could with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. It's a tragically flawed product story-wise, but probably the best Spider-Man gameplay experience so far. Playing as both Spider-Man is a dream come true, but isn't fully realized with no boss fights featuring both characters simultaneously. The game is still graphically impressive, loading between areas is instantaneous, and brings this city to life more than ever. Glitches and bugs will happen occasionally, but they're not game-breaking. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is not the worst Spider-Man game ever. There's just so much potential left on the table. The first half of the game completely lands, but starts to fall apart when Venom enters the picture. Imagine if Sony allowed Insomniac Games to delay Spider-Man 2 to get their original vision to life. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, it is what it is at this point. Let's hope Sony gives Insomniac Games enough room for Marvel's Wolverine and whatever comes next for Spider-Man, because after this game, the amount of lost potential is insane. And yeah, that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys want more videos like this, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Put new videos up on Saturdays. You can follow me on social media at TVSonic Gaming, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, pretty much everything. And you can check out my podcast called the Travis and Damien Podcast. Talk about games, movies, and anime every other week. And yeah, that is all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching this video once again. Now, see you guys next time with more videos.